Hello and welcome to Asia Newsweek. I'm Girish Sawlani. Coming up, the shrinking size of sanitary pads sparking fierce debate and a unique art trend on Chinese social media. Plus, a 13-year-old cricket prodigy becomes the youngest player ever to sign an IPL deal. But first to Pakistan, where mass protests by supporters of former Prime Minister Imran Khan reached a crescendo this week. The government says at least one police officer and 4 paramilitary troops were killed as thousands of protesters defied a police lockdown in Islamabad. Authorities say nearly 1,000 people have been arrested as calls continue for the release of the PTI party leader.
The streets of Islamabad empty after a night of unrest. Pakistan's security forces dispersed protesters in an overnight raid after thousands converged on the capital. Locals expressed their relief following days of violent clashes and hundreds of arrests.
The situation this morning shows that the roads are completely cleared and people are now moving freely. Residents appear to be satisfied, and it seems that the sit-in protest has been cancelled, as many protesters have returned to the city or their homes.
Imran Khan is currently in prison on numerous charges, ranging from corruption to instigating violence. His party, the PTI, has long held the case against him is politically motivated. It's the second time in as many months that the government has shut down Islamabad after the PTI mobilised supporters to call for his release. But protesters say their grievances go beyond just Khan's freedom.
I have never seen such a Pakistan in my life. I have seen 1971 when half the country was divided and we lost East Pakistan. There was not this kind of despair at that time.
Leading the protest was Imran Khan's wife, Bushra Bibi, who was recently released from jail herself. Authorities accused her of stoking violence and were seeking her arrest.
Bushra Bibi has planned it so we kill people, and she wants bloodshed here.
Analysts say Pakistan is at a critical juncture as Imran Khan's supporters go back to the drawing board for a new strategy.
The resolution, whatever it is going to tell us a lot about Pakistan going forward. It will either be a government now which makes a transition toward a PTI-led regime, or it's going to be a rather heavy-handed military effort to suppress those forces which are challenging it.
While the streets go quiet, the PTI say the movement remains defiant. Amelia Costigan, ABC News.
In India's northern state of Uttar Pradesh, 4 people have been killed in violent clashes sparked by an official survey probing whether a 16th century mosque was built on a Hindu temple. Officials say those protesting the survey hurled stones, leading to the firing of tear gas and rubber bullets by police. The family members of the 4 Muslim men who died alleged they were shot by cops, a claim that police have denied. Hindu activist groups, mostly linked to Prime Minister Narendra Modi's ruling BJP, claim several mosques were built over Hindu temples centuries ago. China's defense minister has become the latest target of a wide-ranging anti-corruption probe. It's reported Minister Dong Jun is being investigated over alleged corruption. He is the 3rd serving or former Chinese defense minister to be investigated over the claims, with the military undergoing a sweeping anti-corruption purge since last year. The Philippine Vice President SaraDuterte has walked back claims she schemed to have the president and his close allies assassinated if she herself was killed. She's been subpoenaed to appear at a formal inquiry into the claims, but Ms. Duterte says her comments don't constitute an actual threat amid growing calls for her to be impeached. The threat has exposed a deepening rift between the Philippines' 2 most powerful families. It comes as she and her security staff face another set of criminal complaints for allegedly assaulting authorities and disobeying orders in a recent altercation in Congress.
This was not the first time that the vice president made threatening comments against the president. Just the other month in a press conference, she said that she daydreams about beheading the president. And back then she said, oh, that was just symbolic, it was just metaphorical, but this time it's going to be much harder for her to dismiss this threat because she tried to walk it back again later on. And now the National Bureau of Investigation is looking into serious charges against the vice president, who, unlike the president, doesn't have full immunity from criminal charges. And if ever she's found guilty, she could be disqualified from running for office. The thing with Duterte is they're lashing out in a moment of desperation. The walls are closing in on them. As we speak, there are investigations and hearings, one after the other, about alleged anomalies and corrupt practices, graft in the office of SaraDuterte, allegedly when she was the Department of Education Secretary, and she continues to be the vice president. Her father, the former president Rodrigo Duterte, could face an ICC warrant of arrest in the coming months based on some of the speculations. So the whole house of Duterte is sensing that the walls are closing in, so they're lashing out back and trying to portray themselves as defiant victims of supposed political persecution by President Marcos and his allies.
A record-breaking snowstorm has brought South Korea's capital to a standstill. Hundreds of flights were grounded, with frosty conditions making roads deadly.
The first snowfall of the season at record levels. Up to 26 centimetres of snow has blanketed parts of Seoul, the heaviest the city has seen since 12 centimetres was recorded back in 1972. People left the house prepared to brave the cold.
I heard that it was going to snow today, so I decided to wear thermal underwear, which I don't usually wear. If this kind of weather continues, I think I'll need to dress more warmly from now on.
But the swift change in weather also came as a surprise.
Until recently, the weather was hot, so I wore short sleeves. But suddenly the weather became so cold and there's so much snow. The weather is really unpredictable.
For many, it was an opportunity to take pretty pictures. Others took it as a chance to have a snowball fight.
I saw the snow while studying and came out to feel it.
Even these pandas at a nearby zoo made the most of it, rolling and sliding around in the snow. But for those on the move, the conditions were a struggle. At least 300 flights were cancelled or delayed nationwide, while around 90 ferries were put out of action. Emergency workers tried to keep up clearing the roads, with many drivers having to reassess their routes.
This road doesn't have an electric heating system, so we'll have to take a longer route, causing a 1.5-hour delay.
Icy conditions led to this overturned truck and a 53-car pile-up, injuring 11. Another crash east of Seoul left one person dead. According to officials, one person was killed when a garage collapsed on them as they tried to remove snow. A reminder of how dangerous these conditions can be.
I think the extreme weather is quite serious. It seems like environmental pollution has contributed to this.
The weather agency says snowy conditions are expected to continue, and they've been caused by a big difference between sea surface and air temperatures. The president has called on authorities to minimise damage and inconvenience caused by wild weather, as a winter wonderland turns into a nightmare. Madeline Lobuth, ABC News.
Russia's sports minister has reportedly visited North Korea to discuss cooperation between the sports sectors of the two countries as their diplomatic relationship continues to develop. According to North Korean state media, the ministers met in Pyongyang, where they signed a protocol for exchanges in 2025 and watched a taekwondo demonstration. It follows Vladimir Putin's visit to North Korea in June, when the country's leaders agreed on a mutual defense pact. Police in Laos have arrested 8 hostile workers over a mass methanol poisoning that's killed 6 people, including 2 Australians. Southeast Asia correspondent Bill Birtles reports.
The manager and a bartender at the Nana Backpacker Hostel are among the people who have been detained. Laos state media publishing a list of 8 names, all of them staff from that accommodation provider, and an official in the tourist town of Vang Vieng has also directly confirmed to the ABC that the hostel is the primary focus of the police investigation. This comes as authorities in Laos were increasingly under pressure to show some progress and transparency. It also comes as a 3rd Australian reportedly suffered ill effects from suspected methanol poisoning earlier this month. That person is reportedly in a stable condition and receiving assistance from the Department of Foreign Affairs. Now, the police in Laos haven't ruled out that other bars in the town of Vang Vieng may have served the tainted alcohol, but the detention of 8 people from the Nana hostel makes it very clear that they think the whiskey and vodka that was offered to people staying there is the most likely cause of the methanol poisoning. In total, 6 people died, but it's not exactly clear how many others were affected. A backpacker who knew some of the victims has conducted an informal survey which suggests it could be more than a dozen others who had some sort of illness while travelling through that town and staying at that hostel earlier this month. The Australian government has offered assistance to Lao police for their investigation, and even though there have been some concerns about whether this investigation will be carried out transparently, the government in Laos nonetheless has vowed to bring the perpetrators to justice.
Now let's stay with this story, and there is no doubt the deaths of 6 tourists in Laos has cast a new spotlight on the dangers of methanol in Southeast Asia. But it's a problem locals live with on a daily basis. The thousands are affected by methanol poisoning each year, with Indonesia reporting the highest number of cases worldwide. ABC reporter Erin Handley is here to tell us more. Erin, welcome to the program. Now, firstly, can you tell us, is it mainly through tainted alcoholic drinks that methanol poisonings occur in Southeast Asia?
That's right, Girish. There are 2 main ways that methanol can find its way into your drinks. The first is that alcohol itself might be quite expensive. Methanol is very cheap, and so it can be added to alcoholic drinks to make them go further. That's actually a misconception because it doesn't have inebriating properties. And so it's not only not effective, it's also very dangerous. The other way that methanol can be present is when drinks are home brewed or made in little home distilleries. We see that especially in cultures where making your own wine is quite common. If it's not brewed correctly, then methanol can also be present in those sorts of drinks as well.
And how common is methanol poisoning in Southeast Asia?
Sadly, we don't know the full scale of how widespread this problem is. What we do know is that Doctors Without Borders collates information from open source news articles to try and track just how many cases there are. So in the past 12 months, they've recorded 58 incidents. There were 400 fatalities from that, and 1,200 people were poisoned. And we don't know what the lasting effects on those people were. We do know that as little as 2 teaspoons can cause blindness. But the experts we spoke to said that sadly they think those numbers are just the tip of the iceberg.
So, Erin, why is it such a common problem in Indonesia?
Well, one of the things we've seen in Indonesia is that it has the highest number of methanol poisonings in the world, according to that database from Doctors Without Borders. Now, part of that is that Indonesia has a huge population, but there are also a couple of factors that at play here in Indonesia as well. One is that there is a culture of local alcohol production. In Bali, there's a spirit called arak, and that can be a source of methanol poisoning that we've seen. Another factor in Indonesia is that because it is a Muslim majority country, many people abstain from drinking alcohol. And so that can not only increase the black market need for bootleg liquor, but it can also create a stigma for those who have been drinking, might have been poisoned by methanol. They might be resistant to getting treatment, or there might be an attitude that they got what they deserved. So there's a lot of factors at play there.
I mean, so many factors that contribute to this being such a big problem in Indonesia and the region in general. What efforts are being made by the governments there to stamp out the problem?
Yeah, so Doctors Without Borders is working with some of these local governments to try and educate them about the dangers. Of course, there's a way to educate suppliers that this is not a good way to increase your alcoholic content in your drinks. But there's also a focus on trying to educate consumers to avoid drinking things that aren't in their original bottles or labelled properly. We've also seen local authorities try and crack down on dodgy distilleries. There have been arrests made when there have been fatalities connected to methanol poisoning. But sadly, sometimes these dodgy dealers just sort of crop back up, and for many of the victims that we've spoken to, the court process has been unsatisfactory.
Okay, Erin Handley, thanks very much for shedding more light on these methanol poisonings.
Thanks, Girish.
Thousands of people are homeless after a fire razed a slum in Manila. Displaced residents are sheltering at an evacuation center as emergency services investigate the source of the blaze.
In the early morning, residents of downtown Manila awoke to plumes of smoke as a huge fire engulfed the slum area of Isla Puting Bato, a squatter settlement on the banks of Manila Bay.
We were having breakfast and we heard someone shouting fire. When we went out, we saw the huge smoke and people were already panicking. We saw people hauling their belongings, so we grabbed our stuff.
More than 30 fire trucks, 4 fire boats, and 2 helicopters rushed to tackle the blaze. 2,000 homes were destroyed in the dense settlement, where houses made of wood and corrugated metal are vulnerable to fire.
We rescued our children first, before thinking about our belongings.
Firefighters spent 8 hours battling the blaze, while access to the area was difficult due to a high wall separating the slum from a nearby container terminal. People took shelter nearby, with some escaping on makeshift rafts. Despite the destruction, there were no reported casualties, and injuries are still being determined.
I feel bad because we have no livelihood and no home. Everything is gone. We don't know how we can eat. We are in a very bad situation, and it's almost Christmas.
The cause is under investigation, but blazes are often caused by faulty electrical wiring. It's the second serious fire episode in the Philippines capital this year. 11 people died in August when a 5-story apartment building burned down in Manila's Chinatown district. Yet another community reduced to rubble. Amelia Costigan, ABC News.
Negotiators from 175 nations have gathered in the South Korean city of Busan for a 5th round of talks on plastic pollution. The debate is expected to focus on whether a first-ever global plastics treaty should seek to slash production or focus on waste management. Last week, G20 nations called for a legally binding treaty by the end of the year. Officials say without significant intervention, the amount of plastic entering the environment annually by 2040 is expected to nearly double compared to 2022. South Korea has held a memorial for Korean forced labor victims at the Sado Mines, a day after boycotting Japan's memorial event at the site. Historians say around 1,500 Koreans were forced to work at the mines under brutal conditions during World War II. The Sado Mines were designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in July after South Korea withdrew its opposition to the listing on the condition that Japan acknowledge its dark history. The International Criminal Court has applied for an arrest warrant against Myanmar's military leader and has flagged more will follow. A panel of 3 judges is deciding whether there are reasonable grounds to believe Senior General Min Aung Hlaing is criminally responsible for the deportation and persecution of Rohingya in Myanmar and Bangladesh in 2017. The ICC prosecutor is seeking the warrant after extensive investigations into crimes against humanity, indicating more arrest warrants will follow. More than 730,000 Rohingya Muslims fled to Bangladesh during the campaign that the UN investigators say was carried out with genocidal intent.
This is the first application for an arrest warrant against a high-level Myanmar government official that my office is filing. More will follow. Today marks a culmination of this stage of our work. We will continue to focus in the coming weeks and months as we seek to submit additional applications in this situation. In doing so, we will seek to show that the Rohingya have not been forgotten, that they, like all people around the world, deserve and are entitled to the protection of the law.
Rescue workers in Indonesia have recovered 27 bodies after a landslide hit a village on the island of Sumatra. Several people remain missing. Flash flooding caused mud rocks and trees to dislodge in 4 districts in the province. Recovery teams are continuing to search through the destruction in the Karo area of North Sumatra. The Australian arm of bubble tea giant Chatime has been fined by the Federal Circuit and Family Court for underpaying its workers as little as $8 an hour. Many of those underpaid were international students on visas from China and Taiwan. The case against Chatime has been dragging on for years after the Fair Work Ombudsman took it to court.
The Australian arm of Chatime has been fined more than $120,000 after it was found to have ripped off its vulnerable store workers. The mostly Taiwanese-owned company was first accused of wage theft in the media back in 2019, shortly after the workplace regulator Fair Work lodged action against it. Fair Work went over the books of Chatime at stores here in Melbourne and in Sydney back in 2016 over a 5-month period. It alleged that store workers had been paid less than $8 an hour to work in stores and that they hadn't been paid penalty rates on the weekend. Some of the 150 workers whose pay was scrutinised lost out around $1,000 to $2,000 over that 5-month period. The Federal Circuit and Family Court ultimately found that Chatime had underpaid its workers through ignorance and inattention. It has now fined the company $120,000, while its managing director has been fined around $12,000. Fair Work says that this case was especially troubling because lots of the store workers were visa holders. They were international students who felt scared to voice the underpayment they were experiencing for fear of losing their visas. Chatime has said today that it acknowledges and accepts the court's decision, and it thinks that all of its staff are family members.
Women on Chinese social media platform Weibo are speaking out on the shrinking size of sanitary pads, and it's gone viral. Now, some videos are getting up to 200 million views, and it's sparking a huge debate on women's health across China. Reporter for ABC Chinese Jojo Zhou is here to tell us more. Good to have you with us on Asia Newsweek. Firstly, how did this begin, and what are people saying online?
I think this trend began probably a week ago. Every women were sort of talking about it on social media, saying, oh, their pad are actually a bit short than it is labeled on the packages. So it was actually started like some individual, they're trying to measure the pad at their home and saying why this is not where the actual lens we buy, right? And then they post it online, and more women saw the trend and they follow it. And after that, I think one major brand actually apologized for it, but women still angry about it because like more and more brand, like the more they tax, the more they find out like almost like all major brands are actually a bit short than it is expected.
Now, of course, menstruation is such a huge taboo topic. You've alluded to that earlier as well. Such a taboo topic in China. But given so many people are talking about it, we're talking about 200 million people viewing some of these discussions on Weibo. So what is it telling us about a shift in attitudes? Are people changing the way, are being more open and public and happy to talk about it in a public arena?
Yeah, I think it's quite surprising for me to seeing there's such a trend, and it's even on the internet for like over a week, almost 2 weeks. I think it's quite surprising because like back then, it's a bit still a taboo thing to talk about it. Every time there's sort of people are saying we should care about like women's health, especially for the period, and it should be not a shame thing to talk about it. Ever since there is such a topic, it's been for internet maybe for 1 or 2, it's somewhere just like being taken down from the internet. Like people say, why you guys are talking about that? That's not a thing you should be discussed in the public, because social media is still like a public space. And
I want to show some pictures of some artwork that's being done. This is some artwork that's being shown on Chinese social media that's being done on these sanitary pads, and there's quite some impressive artworks if we can see that. What is the message that people who have done this artwork trying to tell other people? Yeah, I think since like the sanitary pads or like a period used to be a bit like a taboo thing to talk about it. If you just like randomly posting, oh, there is my sanitary pad, if you post it online, you'll probably that thing probably taken down from the internet. But since people are trying to doing more artwork on the sanitary pad, because it's more like an art piece instead of like, oh, that's sanitary pad, is easier for them to keep it on the internet for longer.
and attracting more attention from the audiences, saying that's a very important thing to care about, and saying that period is not a shame thing to talk about it.
Yeah, such a creative way to get that message out. So are people in China now sort of moving away from Chinese brands of sanitary products and instead favoring overseas imports?
Yeah, because ever since like a major brand, they found out that they're all short end than expected. People are actually a bit looking for the sanitary pad from maybe like Japan or like other countries, since different countries might have a little bit different standard about it. And especially ever since that things happened, a lot of brands came to apologize for it. But women also found out the standards who are drafting the standards are also those big brands. So I think they are losing the trust of the public.
Okay, such a fascinating issue. Jojo, thank you so much for talking to us about it.
Thank you.
A weasel has been caught pilfering children's shoes from a Japanese kindergarten. Security footage showed the furry bandit with a shoe in its mouth at the center in southwestern Japan. Shoes had been disappearing, and teachers feared they were being stolen. Weasels are known to stash items, and this cheeky one took up to 15 before police were called. A 13-year-old boy has become the youngest cricketer to sign an Indian Premier League deal. Vaibhav Suryavanshi was secured by the Rajasthan Royals for 200,000 Australian dollars. The young batsman has played in the domestic Ranji Trophy competition since he was 12, and for India's under-19 side, scoring a 58-ball ton against Australia in September. The teen celebrated his ascent to the lucrative T20 tournament with friends and family.
I am elated. It is so joyful for me that my son has created the record of being the youngest player in India to sign an IPL deal. He will have to work hard towards living up to the trust of the Rajasthan Royals and India, and he will have to leave no stone unturned.
Vaibhav was interested in cricket when he was merely 3 years old. He used to pick up his bat and ball despite us asking him not to play. He used to say, "I love this game and I will play it." I pray to God that he keeps growing, always.
And that is all we have time for, but I will see you next week. Bye for now.